Many people ask me for the secret to getting rich, and when I tell them the truth, they usually hate me for it. The truth is that most of you are not investing, you are just gambling in a church with a casino attached. Right now, the market is screaming extreme greed, while the smartest man in the history of money is sitting on $400 billion in cash. My name is Alex, and I spent 8 years as an electrical engineer and AI researcher at MIT. That background helped me find stocks like Nvidia and Micron before they became household names. But today, I need to address a major shift in the matrix, and a massive mistake I made that probably cost some of you money. Your time is the only non-renewable resource you own, so let us get right into the math. The CNN Fear and Greed Index has been pinned at extreme greed for 3 weeks straight. That is the longest stretch of pure euphoria we have seen in all of 2026. It is easy to see why everyone is drunk on the hype, because big tech just announced $700 billion in AI spending. That is a 77% increase from last year, even with supply chains completely broken. But here is the signal that should make your hair stand up. At the Berkshire Hathaway annual meeting last week, we found out that the firm is holding nearly $400 billion in cash. That is 32% of their entire portfolio, which is an all-time record. They have more cash right now than they did before the dot-com crash, or the great financial crisis. Warren Buffett and his new CEO Greg Abel are not being lazy, they are being patient. Buffett always said to be fearful when others are greedy and greedy when others are fearful. The question is not why he is waiting, because the war and the inflation and the housing costs are obvious. The real question is where that money goes when the bubble finally pops and he decides to swing the bat. I think the biggest opportunities are hiding in the parts of the data center that everyone forgot about. But before we go there, I owe you a real apology because accountability is a lost art in this industry. Let us talk about central processing units, or CPUs. For years, the rule of thumb was 1 CPU for every 8 GPUs in a data center. The GPUs did the heavy math, and the CPUs just acted like a traffic cop moving data around. But the arrival of agentic AI has flipped the script completely. When an AI coding agent runs for 30 minutes, it is not just doing one big calculation. It is making thousands of separate tool calls and spawning hundreds of subagents. None of that orchestration runs on a GPU. It all runs on the CPU. Jensen Huang showed the numbers at the latest tech summit, and they are staggering. 12,000 GPUs running at scale now need 400,000 CPU cores running next to them. That sounds like a massive victory for companies like AMD and Intel. But let me walk you through the real math and not the marketing hype. I made a mistake because I was looking at racks instead of individual chips. There are 72 GPUs in a single rack, so 12,000 GPUs need about 167 racks. But each CPU rack now holds almost 23,000 cores. When you do the actual math by the chip count, a data center wants 1 CPU for every 2.6 GPUs. That means there are roughly 3 times more CPUs in these AI clusters than I realized. I did not cover AMD or Intel enough in my previous videos, and I should have. I did not listen to your feedback in the comments, and I should have. I apologize, and I am here to fix that right now. AMD just reported earnings and their data center revenue grew by 57%. Meta just committed to a massive 6-gigawatt project using AMD chips. But there is a hidden cost to this deal that most investors are ignoring. AMD gave Meta the right to buy 10% of the entire company for 1 penny per share. This only happens if the stock hits $600, which would be a $1 trillion valuation. But the stock is already at $450, so it is already 75% of the way there. That means Meta is going to get $100 billion in stock for basically nothing, and existing shareholders will get diluted by at least 20%, because OpenAI has the same deal. The moment the stock hits $600, it is actually only worth $480 because of the dilution. That is the brutal reality of trying to compete with Nvidia. Now let us talk about the biggest comeback story in market history, which is Intel. For years, people called Intel a value trap, including me. But in April 2026, everything changed when they landed 3 massive customers. First, they joined the Terafab project in Austin with Tesla and SpaceX. Then they signed a multi-year deal with Google to build custom cloud chips. And now Apple is reportedly in talks to move their chip manufacturing back to Intel. Apple left Intel in 2020, and if they come back, it changes everything. Intel stock already had its best day since the dot-com era, jumping 24% in 24 hours. They are now the only American-owned factory that can build the world's most advanced chips. But the real tactical nuke just came from ARM. For 35 years, ARM was just a middleman selling blueprints to everyone else. But a few weeks ago, they launched the AGI CPU, which is the first chip they designed and sold themselves. The performance is insane because one ARM chip has 136 cores. It is 54% more efficient than anything NVIDIA has on the market. Meta realized they could save $60 billion on their latest project by using ARM instead of AMD demand. For this chip doubled in the first 6 weeks, and ARM expects to quadruple its revenue in 5 years. They did not just enter the CPU market, they set it on fire. And while the stock dipped recently because of supply chain issues, the smart money is buying the fear. But infrastructure is more than just chips on a motherboard. There are 4 layers of physical infrastructure that make all of this possible. If you want to invest in this group, you need to understand who is actually building the rooms where it happens. Tier 1 is the contractors who physically build the data centers. McKinsey projects $7 trillion in global data center spending through the year 2030. Somebody has to turn the dirt and pour the concrete. First is Comfort Systems USA with the ticker FIX. They install the mechanical and electrical systems for the hyperscalers. Data center customers went from 1/3 of their revenue to over half in just 2 years. They have a record backlog of $22.4 billion that nearly doubled year over year. If you had invested $1,000 in FIX in 2021, you would have $22,000 today. That is a 22-bagger for an HVAC contractor. Next is EI's Holdings, which handles the electrical work and fiber cabling. Their backlog jumped 62% recently, and their earnings per share has multiplied 8 times in 5 years. Then you have Quanta Services, which is the largest infrastructure contractor in the world. They have a backlog of $48 billion, which is bigger than the market cap of most companies on this list. Tier 2 is the equipment that goes inside the building, like switchgear and transformers. Powell Industries is a standout here because they designed the gear that controls electricity flow. They were a small cap nobody in 2020, and now they are a powerhouse with a backlog up 63%. Eaton Corporation is another giant in this space with a market cap of $167 billion. Their data center orders were up over 200% in the most recent quarter. Tier 3 is cooling because the new NVIDIA racks pull 10 times more power than traditional servers. Air cooling cannot handle that heat, so liquid cooling is the only answer. Modine Manufacturing is the pure play here. They transformed from a boring auto supplier into an AI cooling specialist. 5 years ago, their operating margin was -5%, and today they are a 17-bagger. Carrier Global is also working with NVIDIA on next-generation cooling designs. Tier 4 is the hidden layer, which includes fiber and behind-the-meter power. Belden makes the high-speed interconnects that connect the GPUs inside the campuses. They just acquired Ruckus Networks to become a full-stack networking player. Mueller Industries is the only vertically integrated manufacturer of copper tube and brass rod in North America. They supply the critical cooling components that these data centers rely on. Finally, there is Bloom Energy, which makes fuel cells to generate power on site. Oracle just agreed to buy up to 2.8 gigawatts of Bloom systems because the utility grid cannot keep up. When you see all these layers, you realize that the AI build-out is a massive physical undertaking. It is not just lines of code, it is millions of tons of copper and steel and concrete. If I were starting fresh today, I would put 30% into the contractors in Tier 1. They have the cleanest balance sheets and the most direct exposure to hyperscalers. Then I would put 20% into the equipment makers in Tier 2 for their capital efficiency. I would put 20% into cooling in Tier Sen because it is the highest growth subsegment. And the final 20% would go into the hidden layer where the value and contrarian setups live. My point of view is always to put higher allocations into the names with the most direct exposure, but remember that the best investment you can make is in your own education and patience. Every unnecessary dollar you spend on a luxury car or a fancy watch is a worker you just fired from your company. Build your army of dollar soldiers and let them work for you while you sleep. I want to give a big shout out to the community for surfacing many of these companies. We are all learning together in this fast-moving environment. The world wants you to be impatient so they can take your money. I want you to be boring and steady so you can take theirs. The music might be loud right now, but eventually it stops. Make sure you have a chair when it does. Stay boring, stay patient. Peace.